Hi everyone! In this video I'm going to show you how to make an amazing caramel and Tonka mousse cake. And yes, that means that you're going to learn how to make sugar-free caramel. So let's get to it. The base layer of this cake is a brownie, and that starts with 120 grams of chocolate at 60% and 70 grams of butter. Melt these on a water bath and set the bowl aside for now. In my mixing bowl I'm cracking 2 eggs. They are cold because I don't want the brownie to rise too much in the oven. Even though I'm not going to use any baking powder, using room temperature eggs would result in a dome in the oven. Use a hand mixer and mix the eggs on high speed until they froth up a bit. After a few seconds, add 35 grams of erythritol and 35 grams of xylitol and continue mixing on high speed until the mixture more than doubles in volume and holds a ribbon. Add a tiny drop of almond extract and then, with the mixer going, 10 ml of grapeseed oil. After mixing in the oil, you can leave the mixer aside. You're gonna need a silicone spatula. And now it's time to pour in the slightly warm ganache. And make sure you scrape the bowl, you want every drop of delicious chocolate in there. Fold the chocolate in, turning the bowl as you go until you have a perfectly homogeneous mixture that looks like this. Then you can add the dry ingredients, 50 grams of cake and pastry flour and a tiny pinch of salt. Sift them in so there aren't any lumps. And now it's very important that you fold the flour in only until just combined. Don't overmix. And the last ingredient in this delicious brownie base, 20 grams of almond flakes. Fold them in, making sure you don't overmix, you don't want any gluten to develop. This gorgeous chocolatey batter gets poured into a 16 cm silicone mold. I chose to use a square one here, but a round one will do just fine. I'm using a small offset spatula to level the batter into the mold. And while I do that, I'd appreciate it if you took a second to hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel more than you can imagine. Bake the almond brownie at 160 Celsius for 25 minutes and then let it cool down in the mold for an hour. And now it's time for me to show you how to make that amazing sugar-free caramel. In my double bottom pot I have 70 grams of butter and 35 grams of xylitol and erythritol each. Melt these on a small flame, stirring gently. Then set the spatula aside and while the butter heats up, hydrate a sheet of gelatin in ice-cold water. Every now and then, tilt the pot to move the butter, but don't stir, and keep the flame as small as possible. At first it's gonna start bubbling and foaming up, and then the foam is going to go away and you'll notice some browning. Eventually it will become a darker shade of brown, and then it's time to turn off the heat. And this can take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes depending on your stove. Now, with the heat off, very slowly and carefully pour in 140 ml of boiling hot whipping cream. Do this in several additions, stirring at all times. And be very careful not to pour too much at once because you risk burning yourself. Even after you incorporate all the cream, you'll notice that the mixture still bubbles, so imagine how hot that is. Now it's time to light the smallest flame again, on the smallest setting of course. You'll have to cook the caramel like this for 10 to 15 minutes to obtain that perfect consistency. Bring the mixture to a full simmer, and when it bubbles like this, take a whisk and mix permanently. After the time has passed, cut the heat and continue mixing. At first the caramel will seem thick and lumpy, but then as you continue mixing, you'll notice it gets a beautiful shiny consistency. Then add the gelatin, mix it in and let the pot sit. I'm adding the gelatin only because I plan to freeze the caramel as an insert in my entremet. Otherwise, you don't need any gelatin. Look how beautiful, shiny and glossy that is. While the caramel cools down a bit, invert the brownie on a serving platter and wipe the mold clean. We're doing this so the softer, even part of the brownie doesn't stick to the mold once it's frozen. I just love this square shape, and I think it looks amazing. After you clean the mold, you're gonna have to get the brownie back in, and because it's too soft to lift it by hand, put the clean mold over it and invert it again. It'll fall into place just like a Lego. Because the cake's so delicate, it leaves some crumbs on the inner sides of the mold, so you're gonna have to use a damp paper towel to wipe those off. Now pour the slightly warm caramel over the brownie. Would you look at that? How beautiful it is. Tilt the mold so the caramel reaches into every corner. Freeze the caramel-topped brownie for an hour. The next layer in this beautiful entremet is an apricot jelly, and that starts with 200 grams of soft apricots I used canned and 10 grams of xylitol. While those heat up, hydrate a sheet of gelatin in ice-cold water. Break the apricots with your spatula and bring them to a full simmer. Cook them for 5 minutes on a small flame and then cut the heat and puree them with an immersion blender. Once you have a smooth puree, add the sheet of gelatin and mix it in. You can use the puree like this if you want more texture, but because I prefer mine to be very smooth, I strain it. This way it also has enough time to cool down to room temperature. After you strain it, mix it very well so it's perfectly homogeneous, and then it's ready to be poured over the frozen caramel. And now it's best if you move quickly, because that caramel layer is frozen, and the apricot jelly will set very quickly. Scrape the bowl of course so you don't waste anything, and then tilt the mold just like you did with the caramel so that the jelly can reach into the corners. And because this has a more fluid consistency, give it a little shake to level it, then freeze the cake for at least 3 hours. The tonka bean mousse starts with 3 gelatin sheets hydrated in ice-cold water. Set these aside for now and then grate half a tonka bean over 150 milliliters of full-fat milk. Add the larger piece that remains in the end as well. We're gonna strain the custard anyway. Bring the milk to a simmer, and as soon as you notice small bubbles on the surface, cut the heat and cover it. Let the milk infuse like this for at least 15 minutes. In the meantime, whip 220 milliliters of very cold whipping cream to a very soft peak. The cream should still be liquid. Now mix 2 egg yolks with 30 grams of xylitol just until the mixture lightens a bit in color. And this is exactly what I mean, you don't have to mix until the volume increases. Now start adding in the hot tonka milk in small additions. Whisk at all times, and as soon as you add half of the milk like this, it's safe to add the remaining half all at once. Return the mixture to the pot and cook it on the smallest flame while whisking constantly. It's very important to keep the custard moving so it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pot. Cook it to 85 degrees Celsius, then cut the heat and remove the pot from the stove. Continue mixing for a minute or two and then add the bloomed gelatin and mix very well until the gelatin dissolves. You'll notice that your mixture becomes shiny and glossy. And now it's time to strain the custard directly over 50 grams of white chocolate. Only the tiniest bits of tonka bean will go through the sieve, which is exactly what you want. Let the tonka infused custard sit like this for 2 minutes to start softening the chocolate, and then start stirring. After 2 or 3 minutes, you should have a smooth cream that looks like this, and by that time it's almost at room temperature, so it's safe to add 1/3 of the whipped cream. Stir the softly whipped cream in until you have a homogeneous mixture. The addition of the soft whipped cream makes the mixture very fluid, and this makes it ideal to pour it directly into the remaining whipped cream. Scrape the bowl, of course, so you don't miss any of that amazing Tonka fragrance, and then start mixing with a whisk. Mix gently without incorporating any air, and then switch to a silicone spatula to ensure a homogeneous result. And when your mousse looks like this, it's ready to pour. Pour the mousse into an 18 cm silicone mold. Because the mold is square, I'm using the spatula to push the mousse into the corners to ensure that it doesn't have any air bubbles. And you might have been wondering why I'm wearing gloves. Well, it's to unmold the frozen part of the cake. And that's because the heat from my hands might melt that very delicate apricot jelly, and I don't want that. Of course, the rubber gloves don't provide so much insulation, so it's best to work very fast here. And as you can see, removing frozen cakes from square molds is a bit more challenging than doing it from round ones, but eventually it works. I think this deserves a like, don't you? Whenever I make an entremet, I always like to look at the frozen layers right before they go into the mousse. I think it's so cool. Now, place the frozen cake right into the center of the mousse and let it sink in. Because the mousse is very soft, it finds its place very easily. All you have to do is just press it very lightly to make sure it's perfectly level, and then remove the excess mousse. I like to do this with a small offset spatula. And the final step here is to wipe the mold clean. Doing this step makes your life easier when you unmold the cake. Now freeze the sugar-free caramel and Tonka mousse cake for at least 8 hours. After 8 hours, it's time to unmold it, so back to the gloves. Gently loosen the sides, and then, well, that's a challenge. So remember, for this type of mousse, it's better to use a round mold. The risk with a square cake is to break the corners. That's why I'm pressing very hard into the corner. However, I did manage to get 2 corners right, but the others broke. So what to do, how to fix it. The broken corners stick back together easily, and you can cover the cracks with gold leaf. So basically, turning the cake into kintsugi. Whenever you work with gold leaf, keep the sheet of paper that contains the leaf very close to the surface that you're gonna apply the gold leaf on. You can use a pair of tweezers to tear very small pieces from the gold leaf and apply it on the surface you want to decorate, or a small brush with very soft bristles. Of course, gold leaf decorating is entirely optional. Give the cake 4 to 6 hours in the fridge to fully defrost. And there you have it, a perfectly imperfect, amazingly delicious sugar-free caramel and Tonka mousse cake. Enjoy, it's totally worth it. And as always, thank you for watching, liking and subscribing. Until next time, Dessertophiles.